Hi everybody, welcome to Mark Overanalyses Film. I'm Mark, a man who couldn't in good conscience put his friends through talking about films as much as I really wanted to. So I decided to start a podcast. As a classic overthinker, I always wanted to really understand how film stories work and what made them good or not. And then I had that one teacher who changed the game for me. So here, on this podcast, I'll talk about a beloved film every episode and use the methods that the great Mary-Kate O'Flanagan taught me to really understand them. First, I'll figure out what the fundamental features of the protagonist are and why they're important. And then I'll go through the main story beats by looking at the sequences of the film. At the end, then, I'll talk about the main things I learned along the way. As this is a podcast about story structure in film, and this is the first episode, I thought I'd start with the film that, for better or worse, taught everyone in Hollywood about story structure.
20th Century Fox presents the most extraordinary motion picture of all time, Star Wars.
According to the documentary Empire of Dreams, George Lucas consulted heavily with writer, professor, theorist, and general granddaddy of our modern understanding of story structure, Joseph Campbell. The documentary itself even goes so far as to say that Campbell called Lucas his best student. Now, full disclosure, I love Star Wars. Star Wars, to my mind, is kinda special, and it's, I think, because of Lucas's awareness of Campbell's monomyth theory and his hard work in shaping a story to it. This is why Star Wars has some kind of religious aspect to it as well, I think. I might not agree with everything Lucas has said or done, but I do think he really understands story structure, and he also really understands film as an audio-visual medium in a way that few do, and I think it's that combination that really makes his work so special. So now that I've gotten that off my chest, let's have a look at the 5 questions that help us understand the fundamental features of the protagonist. Question 1. Whose story is it? Or who is the protagonist? Sometimes this can be a tricky question to answer, but this is not really one of those times. This is undoubtedly the story of Luke Skywalker, a callow youth living with his aunt and uncle on a small isolated farm on the desert planet Tatooine. Question 2. What is his life dream? The life dream here refers to what it is that the protagonist wants before the story really begins. It could be something they're close to achieving, or something impossible, or occasionally it can happen that they are already living the dream. In this case, Luke dreams of adventure, excitement, to leave this small dirt farm far behind and to experience all that far off horizon has to offer. But this dream appropriately seems far, far away. I really don't know if there's a better audio-visual evocation of a life dream and how far away it is than Luke staring off into the binary sunset to the sweeping score of John Williams. There's a reason why this scene is so iconic. It is pure cinema. Question 3. What is his want? Want here refers to the thing which drives the protagonist through Act 2 of the movie. Act 2 is the longest of the 3, so it needs something like a clear, tangible goal to structure the whole story. And so the want here is a SMART goal, in that it is specific, measurable, attainable just about, relevant, and usually, but not always, time-bound. Okay, so as we've established, Luke wants adventure, right? For sure. But that's going to be difficult to measure. At no point can you really say, okay, box ticked, he's had enough adventure, you can now go home, Luke. We need something measurable. So, what is it then that drives Luke from minute 21-ish to minute 93 of Star Wars A New Hope? The quest to save the princess. Of course, a classic of the adventure genre. He undergoes changes throughout, and his goals change a bit throughout, but that is the single overriding mission of Act 2, and it is Luke's want. Question 4. What is his need? Need, then, refers to the piece of wisdom or human quality that the protagonist needs to learn throughout the story. It's the fundamental change that does or does not occur within the character by the end of the story. So it doesn't need to be tangible, but it should be something really fundamental, something universal to the human experience. Star Wars is a coming-of-age story as space opera, and as such it's about a boy becoming a man. So Luke needs to become a man. He'll do this by marrying his youthful energy and idealism with a kind of calmer, more mature self-belief and awareness of the world around him. Question 5. Does he get what he wants and or what he needs? This is the definitive blockbuster movie. There's no great need for much complication or, what Tom Hanks likes to call bitter compromise. So yes, Luke gets both what he wants, adventure, excitement, rebellion in the form of saving a beautiful princess, and also what he needs, self-belief and an embrace of adulthood. Okay, so with these attempted answers in place, let's see how they map onto the 8 sequences that most archetypal films have, and that Star Wars A New Hope certainly has. But first, let's take a quick break. Archetypal films, then, generally have 3 acts, a beginning, a middle, and an end. The first act is made up of 2 sequences, the second has 4, bisected by the all-important midpoint, and the third act, once again, has 2. A sequence can be defined a few ways, but the definition that I'm going to work with here is that a sequence generally lasts about 12 to 15 minutes, and it is a group of scenes that are tied together by a single or overriding dramatic tension or question. So basically, you might not notice, and you probably shouldn't notice actually, but if a film is doing its job right, you're normally, on some level, asking yourself a different question every 12 to 15 minutes when watching a movie. Once that 12 to 15 minute sequence is finished, that tension must be resolved, and in all but the last sequence, it should turn into a new tension, or the next question to be answered. So let's look at the 8 sequences in Star Wars A New Hope. The first sequence is always basically life as it is. It presents the world or the characters in their current state before the story begins proper. Interestingly though, Star Wars does not show us life as it is for our protagonist here. George Lucas has a lot of world building to be getting on with, so he decides to focus on the bigger picture in sequence 1. Star Wars has one of the all-time classic in media res beginnings. We're thrown right into what feels like the middle of something, but somehow also the start of something. And that is, Darth Vader's Imperial Destroyer is attacking and boarding a smaller ship, and the crew are trying to fend them off. Now this is a dramatic event, but it is also very much life as it is under the rule of Darth Vader and the Empire, and Star Wars does a great job of setting that up. Princess Leia, of course, knows this too, despite her protestations, and it's why she makes her desperate move to place some plans in R2-D2 and shoot him off into space. We then leave space behind for a while and land on Tatooine with R2 and C-3PO. They wander the desert, they get caught by some local creatures, and their future is really beginning to look bleak, until Sequence 2 begins. Sequence 2 is generally, but not always, kicked off by what we can call the inciting incident, the event without which our story as it is would not happen. I think one of the great things about Star Wars, why you kind of know the story flow and the world building is so successful, is that you could argue just what the inciting incident is. You could argue that Rogue One is actually the inciting incident of this film. But in dramatic terms, I'm going to go with the droids meet Luke Skywalker, which happens 17 minutes into the film. It's a bold move to have your protagonist enter 17 minutes in. It's not unheard of, but it is kind of unusual, and I think it's confident as well. It also introduces our first real dramatic tension, which is something like, will this boy discover R2's message? This sequence really is about setting up Luke, as we didn't do so in sequence 1, and you might notice how all the protagonist questions are definitively answered, or set up at least, within this sequence. Luke, the lonely farm boy, meets these droids, and R2-D2 is soon to drag him into the story of his life, to his destiny of bringing order to the universe, no less. But for now, this sequence ends with Luke staring off into the distance, wishing he wasn't stuck in the middle of nowhere with the feeling that his life and his dreams are atrophying. Going to discover R2's secret? We have an answer. Yes. Well, kind of, at least. He discovers that there is a message, but R2 takes off before he can get to see the bulk of it. So he'll have to chase down the droid. He'll have to leave home. And so Act 1 ends and Act 2 begins. Or to put it another way, the beginning ends and the middle begins. Luke has to leave his farm, his home, and we're left to wonder the question, some kind of version of the question, will Luke find R2 and see his message? Which of course will end with him deciding to try to save the princess. This sequence is going to bring Luke from leaving his farm for the morning to deciding to leave his home planet forever. So it's a really big sequence. But this is the question that we begin with, and it carries us for most of the sequence. So Luke takes off after R2, and he soon finds the droid, and some trouble to boot. It's worth noting here that a man who will soon destroy a Death Star is outmatched here by some rough desert raiders. As soon as he leaves home, he's shown just how dangerous it is out there, which is just classic story structure. Fortunately for Luke though, he's saved by Obi-Wan, and they're soon in the old Jedi's humble abode. Here they watch R2's full message, and in the most iconically elliptical fashion in all of film history, Obi-Wan tells Luke who his father was. Kind of. He also gives him his lightsaber and tells Luke that the boy is to learn the ways of the Force if he's to come with him on his adventure. So, only a few minutes ago, Luke was desperate to get going, and here's his chance. And so, naturally, Luke refuses? This is, to my mind, one of the most confusing aspects of storytelling structure. Sequence 3 is all about refusing the call. Luke, like so many protagonists, is trying to get back to his life as it was in Act 1. However, this refusal is not to last long, as Luke is soon to discover that he has little choice. The Empire has followed the trail of the droids and murdered his aunt and uncle. Sequence 3 then ends with Luke accepting the call. He will come with Obi-Wan, he will learn the ways of the Force, and this is, importantly, the first move towards the protagonist's need, and it comes here at the end of Sequence 3. And so our question, will Luke see the message and decide to save the princess? The answer, eventually, is yes. So Sequence 3 then is all about trying to get back to normal, basically, your life as it was, in as quick and easy a way as possible. But it ends with a recognition that this is going to be harder than first thought, maybe even impossible, and greater efforts must be expended. And so Luke sets out with Obi-Wan for Mos Eisley, where they meet Charisma's Harrison Ford, otherwise known as Han Solo. Han agrees to fly them off the planet for a high price, and neither party entirely trusts the other. But, it should be noted, we like Han immediately. Because he's charismatic, sure, and he helps them avoid stormtroopers, but also because as soon as the meeting is over, we see that he's in a bind. I think the dynamic between Han and Luke and how they work as main characters and how their arcs give the story real definition is a fascinating one, so I'm going to pick up on this thread later. For now though, our heroes manage to escape Tatooine just in time, and Luke truly begins his galactic adventure. Of course, just as he does so, it's revealed what he's up against. Not only are the Empire utterly ruthless, but they have the power to back it up. They have the power to blow up an entire planet. At this stage, we're right around the midpoint of the film. Curiously, you would think a film like Star Wars, so well known, so well examined, so written in accordance with the principles of story structure, would be easy to pin down in terms of, perhaps the most important moment in the film, the midpoint. I've seen it stated that it's leaving Tatooine, which, makes some sense. Luke begins his galactic adventure here. I've also seen it suggested that it's Luke and Han's deciding to go save Leia. And that really does make some sense too. It's the major event which acts as a tentpole for the film. Everything leads up to and leads out of that moment, really. For me though, the fundamental principle is this. The midpoint is the moment where the hero makes their first conscious move towards their need. And what does Luke do exactly 62 minutes into a 124-minute runtime? He uses the Force for the first time.
You see? You can do it.
I call it luck.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It might not be the most dramatic of scenes, but midpoints don't have to be. We've just had dramatic scenes. The midpoint points us in the direction of how this story is going to end, what the hero's real need is, and ultimately what the story is about, what this journey is about. To make it official, to finish the scene, Obi-Wan declares,
"You've taken your first step into a larger world."
It's also not for nothing that this scene ends with them arriving at Alderaan, and so, what has Luke done? He's begun to learn the ways of the Force, and he's come with Obi-Wan to Alderaan, which is exactly what he set out to do 15 minutes ago. And so that's our sequence tension answered. This midpoint then kicks off sequence 5, also known as the Honeymoon sequence. In this sequence, the protagonist discovers their need and acts in accordance with it until problems arise. Luke seems more confident from now on, you might notice, but he still shows signs of callow youth. Of course, just because Luke is acting in accordance with his need, that doesn't mean that things are necessarily going super well. Alderaan has been kerploded, and the Millennium Falcon is captured by the Death Star. Now, we know that Leia is on the Death Star, so surely we're wondering now some version of the question, will Luke and the gang find and free Princess Leia? The crew managed to evade capture by the Death Star's stormtroopers, and, left behind as Obi-Wan goes to disable the tractor beam, Luke takes it upon himself to go rescue Leia. And eventually we get to Luke's hero moment.
Too short for a stormtrooper?
Huh? Oh, the uniform.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
Of course, sadly, honeymoons don't actually last very long, and we've now answered Sequence 5's tension. So we enter Sequence 6. Sequence 6 is the final sequence of Act 2, and Act 2 generally ends with what we could call the low point, generally. So this sequence is the bridge from the honeymoon period to the low point, and as such, it's where all the problems really come home to roost. So these guys might be brave, but they're also not big planners. They've rushed into a prison on a Death Star with no escape route and talked their way into trouble. A sign of a lack of maturity yet, perhaps? It's certainly hard to imagine Obi-Wan getting himself into this situation were he involved. So then, no sooner has Luke had his hero moment than everything goes south. Princess Leia has to take charge of her own rescue, because these guys are obviously kind of idiots, and things go from bad to worse as they jump right into a pit with swimming monsters and crushing walls. They manage to escape, but unlike the trash, the problems continue to mount. And those problems have a face: Darth Vader. Vader senses Obi-Wan and confronts him. The fight draws away the stormtroopers guarding the Millennium Falcon, And that enables Luke, Han, and Leia's getaway. But as soon as Obi-Wan sees their path is cleared, he allows himself to be killed by Vader. They escape, but Luke is devastated. And this is our low point.
Can't believe he's gone.
There wasn't anything you could have done.
One additional note here, I'm sure this is, obvious to everyone else out there, but I never really thought too much about why this film was actually called A New Hope. I figured it referred to Luke, but if we consider Star Wars in Hegelian dialectic terms, and who doesn't, to be some kind of argument of, let's say hope versus power, then this is power's strongest moment. If you recall, in Act 1, Leia introduces Obi-Wan as our only hope. Vader then declares himself to be the master now, and he kills Obi-Wan. So he's killed this only hope. This then clears the way, though, for Luke to become the galaxy's new hope by marrying his youthful vigor with the more calm maturity taught to him by Obi-Wan. That is a classic 3-act structure. Back to the plot as it is now, though. Luke and Han escape from Princess Leia, and even though he lost his mentor, Luke's want, his SMART goal, as we might recall, has been achieved. The question of this last sequence, and of Act 2 in total, is brought to a close. And so we come into Act 3, which is made up of the false resolution and the true resolution. You could also say that the two parts are, in this case certainly, big setup and final payoff. Star Wars, I think, is just perfectly formed in this regard. The rebels get the plans to the Death Star and discover one potential weakness, but the Empire has discovered their whereabouts. It's a great setup for a confrontation because it's definitively now or never. While this is being set up, though, I think it's really important to note that we also have a clear personal or internal false resolution to give the story some really defined shape. And that is the false resolution of Han. So he's gotten his reward and he's taking it and running now. Maybe, he hasn't really changed or learned anything at all from this adventure. Maybe he's, just a merc through and through. Luke, as our audience avatar, is deeply saddened by this, but can't convince Han otherwise. And in terms of the story, it also adds to Luke's false resolution. He trusted Han. He believed in Han. And Han has disappointed him. Further, Luke has now lost his family, his mentor, and now his friend, right before he heads off to fight a moon-sized, planet-killing death machine. So it's not the best time. With the setup of Sequence 7 complete, though, we can now move into Sequence 8, the true resolution, wherein we find the climax. And we ask ourselves the big question, can Luke possibly defeat the evil Empire? I can't really keep saying how special Star Wars is, but this is the attack on the Death Star. It's beyond iconic, and rightly so. Everything about it is just set up so well. Roger Ebert loved Star Wars, but described this sequence as overly long. But I'm sorry, Roger, I'm going to have to beg to differ with you on this score. The Rebel X-Wings begin their assault and slowly make their way towards their real target, the trench run. But as the X-Wings get closer, the challenges get harder. Not only do they have the Death Star defenses to deal with, and the TIE fighters to deal with, they now have Darth Vader himself out there attacking them. So 3 things you might notice. And in further magic of 3s, there are also 3 trench runs. The first fighter is destroyed partway through the attempt. The second gets the shot off, but it doesn't sink the way it has to. So now we have set up just how hard and precise the shot needs to be and how deadly the trench run is. Finally, Luke makes his run. We know now that the shot is hard. We know Vader stalked the trench. To make things harder, Luke has to fly at max speed under fire just to give himself a chance at surviving long enough to take the shot. He approaches the target, heavily under fire. He unrolls his targeting computer, but he hears a voice. It's Obi-Wan's, and it's telling him what Obi-Wan's been telling him this whole time. It tells him to use the Force, to believe in himself. And then it happens. With Vader on his tail and seconds left, Luke trusts what he's hearing. He believes in the Force, he believes in himself, and he withdraws the targeting apparatus. And with Luke now acting in full accordance with his need, we get true resolution. Han appears out of nowhere, inspired by Luke and a loyalty he didn't know he had, and takes Vader out. Luke takes his shot, and it's a direct hit. The Death Star, seconds from firing its planet-destroying death ray, explodes, and the heroes escape triumphant.
Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Now that is a climax. Luke and Han return to a hero's welcome, and the story resolves with Leia presiding over a triumphant ceremony in a galaxy that has just been saved. There's a lot I could talk about in terms of Star Wars, but I'll finish by focusing on two things in particular. The first point I'd like to make is around the relationship between story shape and the protagonist, which is, basically what this whole podcast is all about. Star Wars is unusual in introducing its protagonist so late, but even at that, Luke is in some ways an unusual protagonist. I think the reason why Han Solo stands out so much, other than, come on, it's Harrison Ford, is that Han has a really strong, dramatic, and dynamic character arc. More so really than Luke, even though Luke is the protagonist. There's a general rule of thumb that states that the protagonist of the story is the character who undergoes the biggest change throughout the story. I would add here that the lesson that they learn is generally the main argument of the story as well. And on this latter point, Star Wars is certainly Luke's movie. But Han is the one who really struggles with his change dramatically in this film. Once Luke is on his way, there's not really much going back. He loses Obi-Wan, which is a big deal, sure, and one could argue that he doesn't believe he's really hearing the voice in his head, but he doesn't really lose faith in people, or the fight, or the Force. His low point, in terms of his need, is relatively shallow dramatically, or maybe more pertinently, it feels more external than internal. His low point is that he's just seen Obi-Wan die, but with time constraints, this is kind of as far as the character goes with the thought process, or at least as far as the story is concerned. Not that this isn't significant, but it isn't a real counter-argument to his need. Not really. Han's, on the other hand, is far more dramatically and directly contoured. He begins by being a selfish mercenary. He ends by entering an impossible fight against his best interests to help his friends. He says himself that it's a 1 in a million shot. But the bend in his arc comes when he says goodbye to these people. He's leaving them to their impossible fight so that he can go and look after himself. Screenwriter Michael Arndt has a theory that the reason why Star Wars works so well is that the final action of the climax solves all problems at once. It makes Luke a man, it makes Han a better man, it saves Leia's life, it beats the evil Empire, for the purposes of this story at least, and it saves the galaxy. It solves all kinds of problems. Personal, social, spiritual, martial, all at once, and right at the end as well, maximizing this feeling of euphoria from the up ending. It's hard not to agree with Arndt on this, I think. I've seen so many films in recent years, especially where the ending just kind of drags on. Because the film has set up all of these loose threads that need to be tied up, or just as likely these days, need to be attached to something coming further down the road. All of Star Wars leads up to this moment, but it's Han's sudden return that gives this moment its real definition. That real sense that everything, and crucially more than you would think, has come together. This brings me to my second related point. Another character note that Star Wars does remarkably well is the principle of how to introduce a main character. The author Michael Lewis has stated that when first meeting a potential subject for one of his books, he makes sure to do something with them. Rather than just sit down and have a conversation, he'll make sure to, join them in the kitchen after dinner and help with the washing up or something to that effect. The idea isn't to ingratiate himself, or at least not just to ingratiate himself, but rather for writer and subject to really get to know each other. So see how they maneuver, how they go about activities, but, most importantly, how they solve problems. This is so incredibly valuable in getting to know people, and introducing a character in a scene where they have a problem to solve is just good, solid screenwriting. We might not meet Luke for a while, but we do meet Leia quite quickly. And you bet that Leia has a problem. Her ship is being attacked by a massive Imperial Star Destroyer, and they're looking for plans that she has and that she must at all costs keep from them. So yeah, it's kind of a problem. So what does Leia do? Realizing that she's outmatched, she maneuvers around them, placing the plans in R2-D2 and putting herself in harm's way to give the droid a chance to escape. And what does she do the moment she's rescued by Han and Luke? She blows a hole in the wall and jumps through it, again maneuvering around superior forces. This is Leia's characteristic, right? This is how she solves problems. And we are shown it immediately, and then consistently. Han, meanwhile, takes a huge risk, with a potentially great reward in his first scene, and he'll do this again and again throughout. Luke is an interesting case here, though, because his first scene is not one that would really stand out at first, I think. He helps his uncle while his uncle buys some droids. That's the scene. It's not really the most dramatic or dynamic. But there is a notable characteristic on display here. He listens to his aunt, he listens to his uncle, then he listens to C-3PO and C-3PO's recommendation to buy R2-D2. Luke listens, and he trusts. This external trust will soon be echoed back to him when he places his trust, or his faith, in Obi-Wan, who insists that Luke needs to trust himself. When Luke finally takes this in fully in the trench deep into Act 3, and believes that, yes, I really am hearing that voice, I really am feeling the Force, he's able to believe in it, and therefore able to believe in himself. It's Luke's innate characteristics that present him with the possibility to attain his need. It's also worth noting that this is a coming-of-age story, and this characteristic is kind of the most fundamental characteristic of how we learn to be adults. We listen, we learn, we become. In this way, Luke is kind of the ultimate coming-of-age protagonist, or he at least has the ultimate coming-of-age protagonist characteristic, let's say. Luke's introduction might not be a big scene, but it shows us how Luke overcomes a problem, and thus reveals his key characteristic. And it's not for nothing that Luke's ability to believe in people will, when considering the totality of the trilogy and Return of the Jedi in particular, dominate the entire saga, and ultimately be the key to saving the galaxy. It's a good thing he listened to C-3PO then. Lord knows I wouldn't have. This has been Mark Overanalyses Film. If you enjoyed it, please like, rate, follow, recommend, whatever else it is that's good for this kind of thing. Next episode, we're going to be looking at the 2019 film Little Women by Greta Gerwig. Thanks for listening, take care of yourselves, and see you soon.